Senator Wayne.
Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the George W. Norris Legislative Chamber for the 56th day of the 106th Legislature First Session. Our chaplain for today is Pastor Dan Weiss of the Mount Calvary Lutheran Church in Holdridge, Nebraska, Senator Merman's district. Please rise.
Let's begin our day together in prayer. Almighty God, we thank you and praise you for the gift of this glorious day. We ask your blessing as we work together for the betterment of those whom we represent. Guide us and grant us patience and wisdom. As James writes, help us to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Lead us to decisions and actions that benefit others and bring you glory. Holy Father, we pray for those recovering from recent floods in our communities. Provide them with their daily needs. Lead them to what they need to rebuild not only their homes, but also their livelihoods and their communities. Give strength and endurance to them, as well as all those who help in this mission of rebuilding. Above all, Lord, reassure them of your mercy and grace, that you never leave them nor forsake them, and that your steadfast love endures forever. We ask these things not because we deserve them, but only through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Pastor Weiss. I call to order the 56th day of 106th Legislature First Session. Senators, please record your presence. Roll call. Mr. Clerk, please record.
I have a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Are there any corrections for the journal?
I have no corrections.
Thank you, sir. Are there any messages, reports, or announcements?
There are, Mr. President. I have an amendment to be printed to LB 138 from Senator Pansy Brooks. That's all that I have.
Thank you, sir. While the legislature is in session and capable of transacting business, I propose to sign or hereby sign the following legislative resolutions. Number 64, number 67, number 68, number 69, number 70, number 71, number 72, number 73, number 74, number 75, and number 76. We'll now proceed to the first item on the agenda, General File 2019 Senate Priority Bills. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, LB 510, offered by Senator Linehan, relates to revenue and taxation. It eliminates the Motor Fuel Tax Enforcement and Collection Division, Department of Revenue. Changes, eliminates provision relating to the list of exempt property, collection agency, foods, rules, and regs. Senator Linehan presented her bill on April 5. The committee amendments by the Revenue Committee were offered at that time. There was an amendment to the bill from Senator Erdman that he offered. Senator Chambers, subsequent to that offering, moved to bracket the bill. That failed. Senator Chambers moved to reconsider that vote. That motion is pending.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. I wonder if Senators Linehan, Erdman, and Chambers would give us a couple minutes each to refresh us on where we left off. Senator Linehan.
Good morning, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. This is the Department of Revenue's cleanup bill, and I went through the sections, which I think most everybody was here. I don't think it's necessary to read through it all again. Then we had an amendment, a committee amendment to the bill, which actually, this is confusing. So to go back, the original bill we got from Department of Revenue had basically the same idea of Senator Erdman's amendment. We execed on this bill before the flooding, and the committee amendment actually removes the language that Senator Erdman is putting back. So we need to pass Senator Erdman's amendment, then the committee amendment, because it also fixed another issue with the bill, and then I would ask for your support of LB 512. And if there are concerns with Senator Erdman's amendment, exactly how it is, I have told people, and I think Senator Erdman's in agreement, that we'll work between General and Select to fix those, to address those issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Erdman, a couple minutes.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Good morning. This is an opportunity for us here in the legislature to make a difference in people's lives, especially in some of those most damaged areas like Senator Walz's district. That is an issue that is before us now. I had intended to do this bill long before the flood. The Revenue Committee heard this bill 482 long before the flood happened. It just happens to be a coincidence that the flood did happen when it did. What this does, it gives an opportunity for people who have lost property in a flood, fire, or a natural disaster to pay property tax only to the portion of the year that the property was available to them, was functional. So this makes some common sense. This allows us to give people a chance to lower some property tax, which we don't do very often in this body. And it's an opportunity for people to pay on what they can actually use as far as their property goes. So we are, as Senator Linehan had alluded to, we're working with NACO trying to come up with what would work best for everyone, and we're still working on that. And so that's kind of the explanation of what the bill does. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. And Senator Chambers, if you'd like a couple of minutes.
This motion, thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, this motion that's pending is a reconsideration motion, and I will discuss that motion when I'm recognized for that purpose. I don't need to say much other than to make that comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Members, debate is now open on LB 512, the pending Revenue Committee amendment, the pending Erdman amendment, and the reconsideration motion from Senator Chambers. Those wishing to speak? Senator Chambers.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, excuse me, this is my first speaking on this bill, and I spoke for a good amount of time when it was before us. The fact that it's back indicates that Senator Linehan has 33 votes, I suppose, because that's the only basis for returning a bill in this fashion, I thought. I had stated that you all have morality which is compartmentalized. You have compassion which applies to what you consider your own kind. Nobody in that clique that I'm describing, and since I haven't called any names, if you put this hat on that I'm making, then you have self-identified. Those people are so hard-hearted, so cruel, so tight-fisted with other people's money which is available to help, that I'm shocked that an amendment of this kind would be presented today, except that hypocrites of a feather, like birds, flock together. There are people who committed crimes, they were convicted, they were sentenced, imprisoned, served their time. But that did not take away that sensation of hunger when you lack food. There are people on this floor who, like Marie Antoinette, when she was told that the people are hungry, she said, well, they need bread, let them eat cake. There are people on this floor who are so unaware of the realities in this state that they can say work is out there for people who've been convicted. I suppose that person means of any crime. That is not true. The legislature has a judiciary committee. I've sat on that committee ever since I've been in this legislature. An issue that was around at that time and continues now pertain to the difficulty of people with a felony conviction to procure employment. If a bill were brought to do something about that, the very ones who say there's plenty of work out there would oppose such a bill, and therein lies the hypocrisy. I don't feel the way you all feel. This dude that you call Jesus is somebody, as I've said, that I could hang out with if there were such a dude as that, and if he were alive today. The things he talked about are things that I believe in. I'm not talking about a pie in the sky and the sweet by and by. I'm not talking about bringing people back alive after they've been in a tomb dead or supposedly dead for 3 days. That could have been a matter of suspended animation. Or, and this is what really impresses me, bringing a child back alive. That impresses me.
1 minute.
Telling people that if you offend against these little children, it were better for you that a millstone be hanged about your neck and you be drowned in the depth of the sea. Somebody with that concern for children impresses me. So I need to take these moments that are provided to say what I've got to say, and that I intend to do. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Mosher.
Good morning, colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, Nebraska. Just a couple of comments about this amendment that we were offering to the bill. A couple people have mentioned it as a property tax bill, and I don't really look at it in that sense. I think it's more of a sense of they've lost their property and we're taxing them on something that's not there. And so we're really kicking them when they're down. It's not that we're trying to give somebody tax relief. That's not at all what we're talking about, in my opinion. They've lost property, the property's not there, and because of a technicality in the law, we're making them pay property tax on property that's not there. The value's not there. It may be legal to do. A couple of the attorneys I asked, because it didn't seem fair, but they said it's legal. And again, I think we're kicking people when they're down. Okay, a comment about some of us only addressing things that serve us or serve our constituents. When we talked about the TIF bill that Senator Wayne was so passionately proposing, it got 40 votes. And that's not going to help people in my district. I don't have anybody that's going to qualify for that. Nobody. So if I was just going to vote for what was my district, and if I was a selfish SOB, then I'd have voted no. But I voted for him because I want to help him. He wants to do something for his district, even though it could, in my opinion, it could accidentally spread and make TIF go to 20 years throughout the whole state, which I think would be a big mistake, at least with the way current TIF laws are written. So I'd say we all vote for what moves us. And I think that we showed compassion for what Senator Wayne wanted to do. And I think we should show compassion for people who've lost property, not just in these floods, but they could be blown down by a tornado, they could be burned in a huge fire. It could be lots of possibilities. But I don't think we should be taxing people on property that's not there. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Mosher. Senator Chambers.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, because Senator Moser was responding to things I said, people may think that I use the term SOB to describe people who disagree with me on certain issues. That was strictly Senator Moser's interjection. I'm not a Christian, so I don't use that kind of language. Okay. You will never hear me use profanity anywhere, in private, on this floor. What I'm tempted to do, though, is to quote your president, who thrives on vulgarity, hatred, profanity, and all of the things that America supposedly does not stand for. All of the things you all say that flag does not stand for. But based on the calls I still get, the mail I receive, it indicates what those who believe in that flag are about. But here's what is amazing to me. That pledge says the land of the free and the home of the brave. Or is it the other? Or is it the song? I mix them up. They are free to use profanity, issue threats, racial slurs. They're free to do that. But they're not brave enough to put a return address or call without it being an anonymous call. That's what brave flag wavers are. That's the freedom they believe in. But when it comes to the people I'm concerned about and think everybody ought to be free to work, who wants to work, and you all don't want that to happen because you're so hidebound, so bigoted, so sham religious, that you think if they belong to the LGBTQ community, they should not be protected when it comes to trying to get a job and work to make an honest living in the land of the free, the home of the brave, that has liberty and justice for all. Obviously, LGBTQ members are not included in that all. Black people are not included in that all. Latinos are not included in that all. Native Americans are not included in that all. And I want you all to know, and you notice I said you all, I used all, because it applies to you. There is a metaphor that I put into the letter of response to the racist who will include a return address. And here's the way it goes. I have to keep it brief because their attention span is not too broad. Were I a slave and you a slaveholder, although we would live on the same plantation, our experiences would be so markedly and vastly different that a space alien would be hard-pressed to comprehend how two who lived in the same space could have such irreconcilable, differing accounts to present. Now, the slave master, the slaveholder, might be included in that all, who have liberty and justice and freedom, but certainly not the slave. And people invite me to go where they're going to go if their Bible is right, which is hell, and the language that they use guarantees them a trip there. But when I respond to them, this that I say about basic human dignity requires that I show respect toward them, unlike the disrespect they show toward me. And I try to educate them and appeal to that bit of humanity that they may not have lost. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. Senator Chambers, you're recognized for your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. So in these letters, I will send them different pieces of information and acknowledge that they're not likely to read it. But when somebody writes to me and includes a return address, I will respond no matter what they write, unless, as I say it, it's totally beyond the pale. And I think what I'm going to do is put together a packet and let you Christians, let you flag-waving so-called patriots see what your kind send, how they hide behind anonymity. They don't even know how to spell the N-word. And you got some fool out here at the Veterans Home, for which I voted, trying to use the N-word to insult me and doesn't know how to spell it. So I'm going to put that in a packet and give it to you all. And I say to you what I'd say to those bigots and others who contact me. You probably won't read it, but I'll make it available to you. You can scan it. Oh, the F word is used, obviously. That's what Americans thrive on. So when you bring bills of this kind, I'm not swayed. I'm not in favor of stepping on somebody who is already down. And that is not what I'm going to do on this bill. There are probably more than 33 votes, but there are also some problems with the bill itself, but you all have all the geniuses working on it, so I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to let you all deal with it. But at some point, before it's read on final reading, I will have some comments to make and some observations, and they will not be based just on my opinion. You need to read these bills. You need to pay attention to the Constitution. And you need to know that 33 votes, 40 votes, 49 votes cannot abrogate the Constitution. But you do things that make a big splash, that will catch the public's attention, that will make it seem like you are good people, which is not the case. None of this that you're offering takes money out of the state general fund. You're not putting together an aid package at all. Why don't you do that if you really want to do something? This has the earmarks, the appearance, the sound, and the fury of something very heartfelt, something very empathetic, something very sympathetic, but it really is next to nothing. Even Senator Clements, who is speaking in favor of it, speaks of only $12 that neighbors will have to give to help neighbors. So if it's $15 or less, do it. $15, $15. I tip more than that in 3 days. People who work with the public have one of the hardest jobs imaginable, and they're entitled to any amount of a tip that they get. But when the people who run these restaurants are so hard-hearted and stingy, they'll never be fairly compensated. An adequate or living wage should not depend on the roll of the dice.
1 minute.
And the dice are in the hands of somebody who has loaded them against the worker who is entitled not only to the tip, but to a decent, basic floor wage below which he or she will not fall. This is America. God bless America, land that you all love. I could probably sing opera. You wait till I decide to cut loose on Pagliacci. You just wait. I might even do an aria, the Ave Maria. How would you all like that? How would you like it? I'm free to conduct my presentations on this floor any way I choose. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Chambers. Senator Coltman.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I was wondering if Senator Chambers would yield to a question or two.
Senator Chambers, you yield, please.
Always from Senator Coltman, yes.
Senator Chambers, before you start singing those beautiful songs, don't embarrass yourself. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Coltman. Senator Chambers, you recognize to close any reconsideration motion.
Thank you. Mr. President, there are people who get on television who sing worse than I do. They're not worried about embarrassing themselves. They think that what they do is singing, as good as any that they've heard, and a lot of times it is. But I've said before, when I'm sad, I sing. Then the whole world is sad with me. But here's the difference between me and others. When I'm trying to communicate, anything other than profanity, obscenity, and vulgarity, I will use, because there are people with different minds, different capabilities, who are touched or whose attention is grabbed by things which would not have that effect on others. With 48 people here, there's not a single approach that I can take that will be of the same impact on every one of those people. But one thing I can do is unite you all against me. That's when I can bring you all together. Just like Jesus brought all the religious people together to kill him. Y'all need to read those stories, those yarns that you have in the Bible and feed to people as the truth. But the fact that you don't practice them shows that you don't believe them yourself. You don't even know what is in there. So I have to remind you, and I can do it so persuasively, I could bring you something from the Book of the Dead, and you would accept it as something coming from the Bible. Oh, you don't know what the Book of the Dead is? It's not a manual for undertakers. This is a place where every manner of wrongfulness is indulged in. You would not pull a gun in here and shoot somebody. You would not pull a knife and cut somebody to death. You know how you all do it? You all kill people softly. You bring this kind of trash legislation And I say that and use that term advisedly, compared to other things that you don't bring, and be very proud of it and act as though you're doing something so wonderful. But how is it that certain people, based on how you view your religion or whatever it is you claim to have, are worthy of food when they're hungry, for which they did not work, but others, you make a difference? And I reminded you all that when Jesus allegedly, according to the yarn, fed all of those people, he didn't tell his disciples, go out there and see who's been locked up in prison, find out who used narcotics, and don't feed those people. Let them go to work. And you all call yourselves Christians. What do you feel every time a preacher comes in here and prays over you all? I watch you on television, and it's like stand-up comedy. And a comedian is up there knowing that he or she is talking to a bunch of hypocrites. And that person prays to you all, tries to remind you what your job is, the oath that you took, the things you said you would do, the people you said you would help, and you all have it every morning, and it has no impact on you whatsoever. And here I am, unbeliever, non-believer, hell-bound, but I'm a better person than you all collectively could ever be. And I don't just spend other people's money. And for Senator Colterman, I'm a man of means by no means, but what little I have, I'm willing to share. You all ought to follow my example. And you know what you'd wind up saying? It's easier to follow Jesus, but you're not going to follow either one of us. So follow your own conscience if it hasn't become seared and you no longer feel. Why should anybody have to stand and talk to people like you who took an oath to do the things I'm reminding you about? I didn't put that oath on you. You knew what it was, and you lied when you took it. You violated that oath when you said, yes, you do.
That's time, Senator. Time, Senator Chambers.
I would ask for a call of the House and a roll call vote in reverse order.
It's been a request to place House on a call. The question is, shall the House go on a call? Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Record, please.
19 ayes, 4 nays to place the House under call.
House under call. Senators, please return to your desks and check in. The House is under call. All senators, please return to the chamber and check in. The House is under call. Unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. Senators Wayne, McDonald, and Brewer, please return to the chamber and check in. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. The question before the body is Senator Chambers' reconsideration motion regarding to bracket the bill. It's been a request for roll call vote in reverse order. Mr. Clerk, please call the roll.
Senator Wishart, voting no. Senator Williams, voting no. Sir Wayne, voting no. Sir Walls, not voting. Sir Vargas, Sir Stinner, voting no. Sir Slama, voting no. Sir Shear, voting no. Sir Quick, voting no. Sir Pansy Brooks, voting no. Sir Merman, voting no. Sir Moser, voting no. Sir Morfeld, Sir McDonald, voting no. Sir McAllister, voting no. Sir Lowe, voting no. Sir Linehan, voting no. Sir Lindstrom, voting no. Sir Lathrop, voting no. Sir Legrone, voting no. Sir Coulterman, voting no. Sir Kalowski, not voting. Sir Hunt, not voting. Sir Hughes, voting no. Sir Howard, voting no. Sir Hickelman, voting no. Sir Hilgers, voting no. Sir Matt Hansen, voting no. Sir Ben Hansen, voting no. Sir Holleran, voting no. Sir Groney, voting no. Sir Gregert, voting no. Sir Geist, Sir Friesen, voting no. Sir Erdman, voting no. Sir Dorn, voting no. Sir DeBoer, Sir Crawford, voting no. Sir Clements, voting no. Sir Chambers, voting yes. Sir Kavanaugh, Sir Breesy, voting no. Sir Brewer, voting no. Sir Brandt, voting no. Sir Bostelman, voting no. Sir Bowles, Sir Blood, voting no. Sir Arch, voting no. Sir Albright, voting no. 1 ayes, 39 nays, Mr. President.
The reconsideration motion is not adopted. I raise the call. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, Senator Chambers would move to recommit the bill to the Revenue Committee.
Senator Chambers recognized to open a recommit motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the legislature, were I concerned only about my district, I wouldn't even discuss this bill today. Many of the things I get involved in, I would not. But in quoting Abraham Lincoln, the promise being made must be kept. I told you that we're in part 2 of the session now, and that is my territory. I told you while you were doing it that you were writing the rules regarding how we will proceed when we reach this point. You refused to allow a vote to be taken on bills which may not have had enough juice to be passed anyway. But you wanted to show your contempt, you wanted to show your power, you wanted to show your unwillingness to give any ground. So, having learned that from watching it, I'm adopting it as my tactic, as I told you I would. These new senators would think I'm as full of hot air as these other hypocrites running around here. If I promised to do something, then I did not do it. Maybe they don't like what I'm doing, but at least they know that if I make a promise, I will keep it. And that's partly what I'm doing here today. At some point, a cloture motion can be made. I'm sure there will be the votes to get that motion adopted. This is one bill. This is one bill. Total up the time taken on it, and this is a bill I don't even care about, really. And you think that I'm as weak-minded as you all are, and I'll let ugly faces sway me from what I intend to do? How many bills can I do this on? All of them I could. Which ones shall I do it on? You'll just have to wait and see. So prepare to be in a situation where you can do a lot of work in your offices as the time continues to move. Time will not cease its flight, and I'm going to make the use of it that I choose. You all were flying high. Now you can deal with the swoop of the falcon. You reaped. Now you can. I wondered if anybody would catch it. Even Senator Lowe didn't catch it. You have sown. Now you shall reap. Not on every bill. That would be too predictable. How much did you all get done yesterday? Quite a bit compared to what you had not gotten done on other days, huh? And one of the bills, I even had things to say about the bill. But they were on point. There are some bills that I believe should be discussed, and those I will discuss. But I will not do so, nor refrain from doing so, because of some attitude that people not worthy of respect, but who will get it from me anyway, would want to dictate. What did you come down here for? I bet some of you didn't even know when you came. You certainly didn't come down here for this. But to show my collegiality and to further instruct, I'm going to withdraw when I get through the motion I put up there without taking it to a vote. But I need the opportunity to say a few things so that you will know what it is that I'm doing. I believe that since you all want to put this bill in a certain form, namely by adopting Senator Erdman's amendment, then I will remove myself from that track so that you can adopt Senator Erdman's amendment and put the bill in the form you want it to be in. Then I can offer my motions if I choose to, but I may decide, instead of just offering motions, to offer amendments to give you another lesson, a bit more instruction how to engage in obstruction. And that is what I'm doing these days. I say again, give me what I want, and you'll be through with me doing this the rest of the session. Give me what I want. And you know why I put it like that? Because I know you won't. But in case you've forgotten, give protection in the workplace to the LGBTQ community. Allow food stamps to be made available to all of the hungry so that they will at least be able to obtain what child rapists, murderers, wife beaters, kidnappers, mutilators are able to get. Despite what Senator Groney said, people who have drug problems and convictions are not worse than that catalog that I laid out to you. Who would you rather have if you had to have somebody in your community you had to? Somebody who abused drugs, who possessed drugs, or somebody who rapes little children? You give it to the rapist. That tells me what you are. You take care of your own. You take care of your own. Manslaughter is murder. The people who commit manslaughter get out. Man killers, women killers get out. But somebody who committed a drug crime cannot get what the man and woman killers, the child rapists, those who produce and possess and dispense child pornography. What are you all saying about this legislature? Bunch of hypocrites of the worst kind. You call yourselves Christians. That is a sickening term to me, because I look at you all who wear it. In fact, there might be some people who really believe in that. I'm going to call you all the so-called Christians, think about yourselves. You will give a child rapist something, a murderer something, a kidnapper something, a false imprisoner something, a child pornographer something, but somebody who got caught by drugs, no. What about alcoholics? Should any public money be spent to provide treatment for people who get cirrhosis of the liver from too much alcohol? How about cancer treatment? Should there be any public money going for the treatment of cancer if the ones who got it from smoking? They chose to do that. They chose to drink. You all's so-called values are so skewed, it is impossible to find any logic to it. And that's what you all do, and then you pray every morning and salute that flag. You ought to be ashamed of yourselves. You know why I'm willing to talk to you all? Jesus talked to people worse than some of you. And he knew from the beginning which ones would listen and which ones wouldn't. But he did it anyway. That's why I say he's a cat I could have hung out with. If he was in one corner of the chamber and I in the other, we would have had you hypocrites surrounded. But see, Jesus was a man who would go quietly and unresistingly to his death. And you might put me away, but you'd have a fight doing it. What will I do if I pull this amendment, this motion? I'm going to show you all how to amend or offer amendments to bills. And since you've made it up in your minds that none of you are going to speak on the bill, I'm prepared to take us the distance by offering amendments to the bill. And I will put no more thought into crafting an amendment than the thought you put into trying to do something for the people who really need the help.
It's time, Senator.
I would withdraw that motion, Mr. President.
The recommit motion has been withdrawn. Is there further discussion on LB 512 and the pending amendments? Senator Chambers.
Yes. Now, Mr. President, members of the legislature, I'll begin to speak on Senator Erdman's amendment. Then I'll speak on the bill. Then I'll go back to the Madison, which means doing what I want to do and what I do so well and do better than anybody else. Unlike Senator Groney, I don't need help when I'm going to try to kill a bill softly and with kindness. And I also will admit and acknowledge that I can't kill this bill and then make a confession. I don't even want to kill it. You all might, with this tiny, tiny bit of consideration being shown, even though it's for publicity purpose, each little thing might lead to something that's a bit bigger. I've been told that a snowball, if you can start it rolling where there's fresh snow and it will not stop rolling, can trigger an avalanche. I find that hard to believe, but I don't go into those circumstances, so I will accept what other people say. Compared to an avalanche, a snowball is infinitesimally tiny. You couldn't even find it, but it started with that. I don't know if you all know what a match is because you have cigarette lighters and things of that kind. But a match is a piece of wood with phosphorus on the end of it, and if you rub it on an abrasive surface, it'll spring into flame. A match, a little match, can start a conflagration. A little match can set off a wildfire that will burn thousands, tens of thousands, maybe someday hundreds of thousands of acres of trees, underbrush, and whatever else is consumable, such as houses, businesses, automobiles, and even human beings. Big things from small things grow. What is smaller, we're not talking about atoms now, than a microbe or a virus? Think of what viruses can do. What does HIV stand for? Human immunodeficiency virus. So when they say HIV virus, they're being redundant. HIV, that V stands for virus. So it's like saying a pneumonia virus. Look how tiny that virus is, but what can it do? Great things. A little acorn and a huge oak tree will wind up growing from that little bitty acorn. That's amazing to me. So letting those things be metaphors or analogies, I will act in accord with those notions. Maybe I will drop a word at the right time, and it will lead to somebody deciding that all that hypocritical so-called religion may have some validity. Maybe it's something to be followed rather than to just be held up and boasted and bragged about. I understand some of you all have Bible class. What do y'all study when y'all read?
1 minute.
Oh, there's a lot of sex in the Bible. There's incest in the Bible. Wars, killing, carnage, rivers of blood, hatred in the Bible. In fact, it's a bloody book. That's what it's been called. Human and animal sacrifices. People taunting each other's gods and wanting to have contests to see whose God is going to come out on top. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. You recognize again, Senator Chambers.
Thank you, Mr. President. I ought to read this incident from the Bible and give you the citation because it's fantastic. And I'll leave out some of the build up to it. But there's one of these old guys called a prophet. Not profiteer, but a prophet. And some people didn't like him. Prophets had a way of saying things that people didn't like. They had a way of upsetting the rulers. They even said bad things to kings. Can you imagine that? Some guy running around in a tattered robe, flip-flops, long whiskers, long hair, eyes that make him look like he's insane, talking bad to the king. What kind of nonsense is that? But it's in the Bible. And if you want to look up one example, David was a king. There was a prophet. I think his name was Samuel, I believe. But this particular one was named Nathan. Or was it? Who knows? I know. Other people have to take my word for it. It could have been Elvis Presley when it's translated. And Elvis would have come up to the king. He said, "King, you're the king, but when I get through with you, you're going to be all shook up." What about little David when he hit Goliath in the head with a rock thrown from his slingshot? What did that lead to? Goliath was dressed in iron clothes. You heard the term shake, rattle, and roll. You didn't know that little David created that, did you? With a little rock. He took this little rock, and there's an opening in Goliath's helmet. A little bitty opening up by the forehead. And David threw that rock right into that opening, hit Goliath in the head, and Goliath shook. His armor rattled. And when he hit the ground, his head rolled because David cut it off. That's where you got shake, rattle, and roll from. You didn't know that, did you? Bible's source of everything. And that's an interesting story, but the one that I started out, because you think old people start talking, then they forget their way. This old prophet, the first one I was talking about, who shall remain nameless unless I decide to share his identity with you. Issued a challenge to these people. You don't believe in my God, Jehovah. You believe in the force. Well, in this contest, may the force be with you. But it won't help you. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to set up an altar. We're going to dig a trench around that altar. We're going to fill it with water. And you have a God, and I have a God. And we're going to see whose God answers with fire. So, because the ones who wrote the Bible are on the prophet's side, and as propagandists do,
1 minute.
he said that his prophet was ridiculing the God of these other people. Where is your God? Is he asleep? You're making enough noise. You're cutting yourself. Your blood is flowing. Can your God not see? Has your God gone on vacation? Now, that having failed, let me show you what my God can do. Shazam! And there was a bolt of lightning and a boom. And everything was consumed, the altar, even the water. I'll have to give you the rest of it when I'm recognized again. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. And you are recognized for your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. Here's what I got from that. That's what I say to you people. That's what I say to all you so-called Christians. Where's your Jesus? Where's your God? Show me a thing or two. Show me your Jesus. Oh, has Jesus gone on vacation? Is Jesus deaf? Has Jesus lost his power? Jesus, where are you? Come out, wherever you are. You don't like that? That's in your Bible, making fun of another God. I'm giving you back what I read in your Bible. And that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to use that to try to stimulate your minds. But it's not working. It's not working. I hear laughter. I know it, Jesus. We both knew they weren't going to pay attention. If they don't pay attention to you, I know they're not going to pay attention to me. Oh, I talked out loud. That was supposed to be a private conversation. I forgot that I don't have to speak out loud. Jesus can hear me. Show me. Show me what Jesus is about. Don't tell me. Your words mean nothing. And you all have the power not only to show me, but you took an oath that you would. You knew that at some point in your life you'd come across somebody like me, and now you've met me, and now I'm among you. I don't think Jesus would come to a place like this. Oh, he's streaming another mess. He doesn't go to y'all's churches either. That's why your churches are some of the most segregated places on Sunday morning. That's why people who are in these churches support a man who's been married multiple times, who grabs women's crotches and jokes about it, who has dealt with prostitutes and tried to pay them off so they wouldn't tell on him. And the Christians support him. They're the strongest supporters he's got. So I think I'm going to leave Senator Erdman's amendment alone. I'm not going to offer any amendments, which I couldn't, because his is an amendment to an amendment. And I cannot offer an amendment to that amendment. But if his is adopted and added to the committee amendment, then I can offer an amendment to anything in the committee amendment. And that's how I can get another shot at his if I want to. But I haven't offered an amendment to his. I'm using this opportunity to praise the Lord. And I know some of you pistol carriers are saying, and I wish he'd pass the ammunition. See what kind of Christian you are? Jesus has a hard job. I think he'd rather go up on the cross and get it over with than be tortured by you all down through the decades, through the centuries, through the millennia. You still torture him. But that first time around when he was dragging that big old cross and nobody would help him, and the big black Simon the Cyrenian came and took the cross off him, said, little fella, I can't save your life, but I'm not going to let them treat you like they're treating you here. So at least at this point, you're going to have somebody to help you. So maybe I'm Simon today, trying to take that suffering off your Jesus. You're killing him. You don't hear him crying out. You don't hear it. Are you deaf? Or is your heart so hardened that you choose not to hear? Your conscience is so seared that it cannot react anymore. You still have the time and the opportunity to redeem yourselves. You can make atonement. And you don't have to do it by confessing sins or anything to all these people. Just let your conduct comport with what it is you say you believe. Let us feed the hungry, and don't say, let them go get a job. Let us help those who want to work obtain that employment without being discriminated against. Let us help those who are working, I emphasize, get a decent minimum wage. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. Senator Lathrop.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I 100% appreciate the Erdman Amendment, what it's trying to accomplish. I do have a couple of questions about the practical effect of it. And I've had a conversation with Senator Linehan. I'd like to continue that, or maybe do it on the mic, just so that we can talk about what happens if you are Pilger and your town is wiped off the map and now you want to rebuild, and this essentially takes away the very revenue they may need to rebuild their town. And so with that, I would ask if Senator Linehan would yield to a few questions.
Senator Linehan, would you yield, please?
Certainly.
Senator Linehan, can you tell us how this amendment would work in the event we had a Hallam or a Pilger, one of these towns that are, bigger than an intersection with a gas station in it, but smaller than a Class 1, where they sustain one of these monster tornadoes come through and, like Pilger or Hallam, and cause significant damage to the homes in that town and to the infrastructure. And for my hypothetical, let's say the school too and the fire station.
That's an excellent question, and thank you. Here, we know that the bill is not perfect as drafted. I think Senator Erdman, we all know that. And we have agreed that we will work with the counties and others on the floor that have concerns about definitions between now and select. So to that specific question, I've not talked to bill drafting or not talked to anybody about actual legislation, but what I thought might be a possibility is if you have a whole community like Pender that was wiped out, we could do a thing where they can raise the levies up because the land is still there, right? So they still own property. So we could have a fix for that particular, we'd have to define it well, situation where you would allow the city, would most likely be a city or small town, allow them to raise their levies above the maximum levy if the people in the town agreed that's what they were going to do. But you would have to have buy-in from the community that that's what they wanted to do.
Aren't we creating winners and losers in that circumstance? And in this respect, if it comes through and wipes out half the houses in town, the following year, because we pay in arrears, half the town won't be paying any taxes, or they'll pay very little taxes based upon the land and not the structure, because that had been wiped out. And the other half of the town then would have their levy raised because the half of the town that was wiped out is having their taxes forgiven or significantly diminished.
I would say the tornado decided who the winners and losers were. If you got a town with half the homes who aren't harmed by the tornado and the other half are wiped out, as I said the other day, in Elkhorn, I looked down, I'm above, so I wasn't affected at all by the flood, but I drive out to Valley and Waterloo and see all the damage. It doesn't bother me that my levy might go up, or up cent or two or whatever, to help those people. That doesn't bother me. I am a winner because I did not have flood damage.
But is it a cent or two?
If
you take, is it a cent or two? If half of in our hypothetical village, if half of the homes are completely destroyed and half of them are left untouched by this tornado, right? Now what this amendment would do would say, during the period of time that your house was destroyed, we're going to basically value you and tax you on the land, but not the house that was destroyed.
That's right. That's what it does, and that's what I think we should do.
I'm not arguing with that.
Okay.
I just want to make sure this works. And so now the houses are gone, but you can't make up for that loss in revenue for all those houses that are gone by getting a couple of cents out of the ones that remain.
I think it would depend, obviously, on a lot of things, and that's why we have local control, and that community would have to figure out the best way for them to go forward. But if you've got half the homeowners with no destruction and the other half with destruction, those homeowners are living there, know that that community depends on them to stay there and rebuild. I think it would be in everybody's interest to help the people that are trying to decide whether they're going to leave town and not come back.
That's time. Thank you, Senator Lathrop and Senator Linehan. Senator Friesen.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, Senator Lathrop, when we were discussing this in revenue, so to speak, when that bill came before us, but come January 1, if those homes have not been rebuilt, they're still going to go to the value of the land. So it's a matter of timing more than anything else. If those people choose not to rebuild, or even in a small town, if you've lost 3/4 of your homes, there's not builders that can build enough homes in that short amount of time, even if they want to. So come January 1, those properties that are gone, they're still gone, and they'll be gone for the whole year. Now, maybe if we're going to prorate it in arrears, or so maybe if a house gets built in February, it should go on the tax rolls immediately. I won't argue that, because now they're given a 9-month free time, so to speak, until the next January 1, and then their property goes on the rolls. But in the end, all you're talking about here is a 6-month time period where those taxes are going to be forgiven, or not forgiven, but taken off the rolls because the property's gone. To me, it goes back to a car. You crash your car and you take the plates in and turn them in. They give you your money back for the unused portion. The car's gone. This is just it's going to be for that short time period, but come January 1, they're still gone. And there is no process where they could rebuild in that quick a time frame that I can see. So I don't see that this has a huge impact. I mean, again, it definitely is going to have an impact. There's the strain on communities, and you know as well as I, the federal dollars, even if there is federal aid down the road, it comes in 2 to 3 years later. There is a struggle in between, and I think that's what we're going to see with the flood relief. There's going to be an influx of federal dollars to help, but there is coming 2 to 3 years in arrears, and so for these next couple years, they're going to be struggling. There's no doubt.
But I do think in the end, to the fairness issue, to me, I do support the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Friesen. Senator Lathrop.
Thank you, Senator Friesen, for those comments. And I agree with the principle here. I really do. It makes no sense to have somebody pay taxes for a building that's been destroyed by some kind of a calamity, whether it's a tornado, which is a common way of taking out a lot of property, or flood. I just want to make sure that because when this happens in Omaha, we have enough taxpayers that we can, if they need to, say, well, we're going to bump it up because we have a whole bunch of houses that are not going to be assessed at the full value, but it's the smaller communities, and whether we're making it more difficult for them to rebuild with a policy that isn't well crafted or hasn't been thought all the way through. If we're going to do this work between general and select, I'm fine with that. I'll support it. I'd be a little more comfortable if we had the whole plan in the amendment and then adopted it on select file. But what I will commit to is that when 512 comes back on select file, I'd like to have the Pilger conversation and say, how's this going to work? And it's probably, most certainly, it's a bigger deal for you guys. I suppose it could be if some big wide tornado went through Ralston, but it's more likely to be something that happens out in what I'd call the 3rd district, right? And when it happens, have we done something here today that makes rebuilding that community difficult? If it hits the fire department and it hits the school and now in town hall, and you go, we need some revenue, and by the way, we just had this thing kick in and our revenue's down. And I'm not a revenue committee person. You guys probably think of this stuff all day long, and I'll look forward to whatever solution that we can craft, but I'll also want to, I think, have a conversation about it to make sure 49 people have thought this through and that it works. And with that, I'll yield the balance of my time.
Thanks, Senator Lathrop. Senator Albright.
Thank you, President Foley. I rise in support of AM 1217. Senator Erdman has put a lot of thought into this, and again, it was before the floods ever happened that this bill was something that was in the works. And I do have an email here from Jeff Curry, who happens to be the assessor in Dakota County. And he has had several conversations with, I think, a lot of you folks here on the floor, and I appreciate all of the energy that he's put into this as well. But you know, back in 2011, Dakota County was part of a flood event, and he said it was very difficult, not only for him, he had damage himself, but so did those in his office. And he said that Dakota County stands in support of 512, and obviously Amendment 1217, Senator Erdman's. And of course, he cautions with the department and the NACO's added ensuring that there's fairness and that. But sitting as a county commissioner for 4 years in Sarpy County, one of the largest counties in the state at the time, and I really feel like when you have these taxes are paid in the rear anyway, and you would know what's coming at you in years ahead. So, you know, what we had all agreed to, even with Senator Dorn having an issue with his Beatrice 6 and what this floor has done, and knowing that we are Nebraska strong, we will figure out what we need to do. And I don't think there's any one of us in this room that wouldn't pay that added amount to keep our schools, our fire departments, our buildings in town, as well as our homes and structures, what they need to be. So again, I thank Senator Erdman for bringing this bill, and Senator Linehan and the Revenue Department for putting it in their committee bill. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Albright. Senator Clements.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to start off talking about the Hallam and Pilger situations. As I've said before, I'm 68 years old, and in that many years, I think those are the only two villages that I've experienced in Nebraska, as I've lived here that long, that have been completely destroyed. So I think we're talking about an extremely rare situation. I knew the pastor at the church in Hallam. It was a woman who then found that the other churches in the state came to their aid. The homeowners who lost their houses, their insurance restored much, and restored them. They were able to rebuild. And the Norris School was pretty much destroyed. I know that Senator Baker was one of the leaders there that helped it rebuild, and it built back better than ever. I think that donations, volunteers, FEMA, the governor's emergency fund is discretionary, would be able to help many of these. He's had a $5 million fund that the Appropriations Committee is working on restoring. In the last few days, we've been discussing how much we need to fund that. And in these circumstances, legislature is very willing to also step in and do our part. If you still have the spreadsheet that I handed out, in the more common situation, like, well, our situation is that common, the flood event that we had, but it was widespread and not localized, completely damaging a whole county. I did calculate what I think my county would experience in probably the worst case was if 6% of our houses in Cass County were destroyed, that'd be 616 houses. The effect of percent tax increases would be 1.7%. And an average home value is $120,671, and that would increase the tax per house of the surviving houses, $38 in Cass County. And a farm of 160 acres would increase $188 for the following year, and most likely just for 1 year. And the rest of the people in most situations, and in this current flood situation, will be able to contribute a small amount, make up for the loss that this bill would create by exempting the completely damaged homes from March 15th for the rest of the year. And so I think I probably will support an amendment to look at a complete devastation situation, but I think that's very rare, and that there are other sources of funds and support for complete devastation situations that I think it's important to continue to support Senator Erdman's amendment 1217 and also the revenue amendment 423 and eventually the bill 512. And so I just urge us to not get distracted by a couple of very rare situations and to continue to support the Erdman amendment. And I thank you, Mr. President. I yield my time to the chair.
Thanks, Senator Clements. Senator Breezy.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good morning, colleagues. I rise in support of Senator Erdman's AM 1217 and AM 423, LB 512. I want to thank Senator Erdman for bringing this with the recent flood event. This is very timely legislation. Nebraskans are hurting. We should be doing anything we can to help, and this is one measure of relief that we can offer. But even without the recent disaster, this is still simply good legislation. It boils down to this. If your property is destroyed, should you be forced to continue paying property taxes on its full pre-destruction value? And I would suggest that any way you slice it, the answer should be no. It's about fairness to our taxpayers. It's about doing what's right for our taxpayers. It's about showing our commitment to the taxpayers who have recently suffered devastating losses. Nebraskans need our help. This is one way we can help them. And are there some tweaks needed? Yeah, there's perhaps a few that could be addressed. And I want to thank Senator Lathrop for bringing up that point, and others have also, about, in the unusual event of very substantial destruction, what is a political subdivision to do? But I disagree with the argument that, well, we're creating winners and losers. As Senator Linehan said, Mother Nature created that loss, and we're trying to rectify that loss to some small degree. And as Senator Friesen mentioned, we're only talking about limitation of taxes for a limited period of time. And as I mentioned the other day, I think right now there's only one county up against its levy limit. And we have to remember, LB 773442 provides levy limits for cities and counties, but 773444 provides these subdivisions with the ability to exceed those levy limits with a vote of the people for limited periods of time. And so there are ways around financial concerns for these political subdivisions, and I don't think this is a huge concern on this bill, and I would ask your support of AM 1217, the other amendment, in LB 512. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Breezy. Senator Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am still listening to the conversation and would like to have Senator Erdman yield to a question, please.
Senator Erdman, you can yield to a question, please.
Yes, I would.
Thank you. First of all, I want the body to know that I really feel that if your house is completely destroyed, burned down, taken away with a flood, and all you have left is the property, that you should not have to pay taxes on a ghost home. So I was wondering if you could just give me your definition of what destroyed is.
Thank you for the question, Senator Walls. I think one of the things that needs to happen between general and select is that we work on those definitions. And I had visited with the people from NACO about those issues and talked about how we determine that. And so I think those are the questions we're going to have, and we have to make sure we answer those before we come back. But the point is, if the house or the facility that you were using, whether it be a repair shop or a gas station, whatever it is, we need to have a provision put in place so that we know exactly what that means. And consequently, we need to describe that in a way that people can understand what it means. So I don't have a specific definition today, but I hope that between now and select file, we can come up with a resolution that would be very descriptive and people will be able to understand it.
Okay. And just another question. Today, does that include homes that are red tagged? Today?
Today, they're red tagged, so that home is uninhabitable because it had water damage. It may have mold or something of that degree. Is that what you're saying?
Or the furnace needed to be replaced, or the electrical?
That doesn't sound like that would be destroyed to me. And so we need to make sure that we understand what destroyed means. And so that's why I think it's important that we come up with a definition that makes some sense. Because if you just need a new furnace or you need to change the drywall or whatever it is, that's not a significant distraction from you being able to live there. And so we have to make sure that this is applied to the people who actually have suffered a loss, a significant loss.
All right. And then just my last question is, so it does include barns and storage sheds and things like that at this point?
Yes, it does.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Walls and Senator Erdman. Senator Kavanaugh.
I wonder if Senator Erdman would yield for a follow-up question.
Senator Erdman, yield, please.
I'd be glad to.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I was listening to your conversation, and so I wasn't familiar with the red tag. But Senator Walz did bring up if a home has mold. I understand like a furnace is replaceable, but if a home has mold and is not habitable, would we be including those sorts of homes in this?
My initial response to your question would be I don't believe that's the case, because mold can be mitigated and you can solve that issue quite quickly, I should add. So I think that the description of destroyed needs to be defined so that we can understand what it is.
Okay, because I'm just thinking that there seems like there's probably a few opportunities where there's a lot of things wrong with homes that would make them uninhabitable, and if they can't be fixed by the people that own the property, would it be a matter of, I mean, if your house is destroyed in one avenue or another, I guess I'm just trying to think through, and you can't afford to fix it,
Right.
whether it's rebuild it or mitigate the mold.
Can I share an example with you? I'll give you an example that we had happen in our county about 10 years ago. We had a property that had black mold, and they had tried everything possible to rid the house of the black mold,
Yeah.
and they could not. And their last option was to burn it down and start over. And in that case, I would consider that home to be destroyed because it couldn't be fixed. But that's a rare occasion. I've not seen it happen since, but it did happen once, and that very possibly could happen. So that would be an issue we'd have to make sure we put in the description.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Urban, you recognize to close on your amendment AM 1217.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. I appreciate the conversation this morning. I'm glad to answer those questions. I'm glad that people are listening and people are engaged in the conversation. As I said earlier, as we move forward with this bill from general to select, there's work to be done on this bill, and I think that with the help of NACO and those others involved, the cities that are going to be impacted by this as well, I think there's a way to solve and come to a resolution on what this bill should finally say. But one of the things that I think we need to keep in mind, we seldom have an opportunity here on this floor to vote for a property tax relief bill of any kind. We have tried for many years to do that. This is an opportunity, even though it may be slight in some cases. But getting back to Senator Lathrop's comments, I just may conclude with this. Senator Lathrop, most of the time when those tornadoes happen, it's either May or June. That's generally the tornado season. And in that case, their property tax would still be paid up until the time of destruction, which would be a half of a year. And so I think that we're concerned about some of these things. As Senator Clements had commented, in his 68 years, he's seen it happen twice. That doesn't mean it can't happen again. But I think we do a lot of things here that we don't take into consideration what may happen. But I think it's important that we take an opportunity to be concerned once for the people who pay the taxes. And those people who didn't lose everything will have an opportunity to help those who need to recover. And I think Nebraska people are very kind-hearted and very giving. And Senator Clements alluded to that, what happened when those towns were destroyed by tornadoes. So this is an opportunity for us to advance this bill, to make it a better bill coming back on select, and I would encourage you to vote green on 1217 and the underlying bill 512. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Urban. Members, you heard the debate on AM 1217. The question for the body is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record vote's been requested. Record, please.
Voting aye, Senators Albright, Archibald, Boston, Van Brandt, Breesy, Kavanaugh, Clements, Crawford, DeBoer, Dorner, Urban, Friesen, Geis, Greger, Groney, Halloran, Hanson, Hildress, Hickelman, Howard, Hughes, Hunt, Coulterman, Lathrop, Linehan, Lowe, McAllister, McDonald, Moorfeld, Moser, Merman, Pansy, Brooks, Quick, Slama, Stenner, Vargas, Walls, Williams, Wishart. 41 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on the adoption of the amendment.
AM 1217 is adopted. For the debate on LB 512 as amended, Senator Groney.
Thank you, Mr. President. I haven't spoken on this bill. I'm on the Revenue Committee. I voted it out. If you read the original bill of 512, it's just cleanup language. It makes government more efficient. It gives the government employees the ability to be used for more projects. It's a good cleanup bill, and unlike some, it's not lengthy. It's easy to understand, and then the addition of As I've said before, the only mistake we made was to take the disaster out of the bill. When we thought we were wrong, we were actually right. And Senator Erdman puts it back in there, and this just helps average people. This isn't just disaster, folks. There's folks who lose their businesses or their homes in a fire, or a tornado might just hit their house. Those individuals, I've known businessmen who have lost their business to a fire. Their business stops. They have to add an expense to rent another place to work out of, and then they're burdened with that property tax for that destroyed property until it gets replaced. This is just good common sense. We tax people on wealth, and if your wealth is gone, has been destroyed, you shouldn't be taxed on it. So I'm in full support of LB 512. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Groney. Senator Chambers.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the legislature, I would like to ask Senator Linehan a question.
Senator Linehan, would you yield, please?
Certainly, thank you.
Senator Linehan, with the adoption of Senator Erdman's amendment, the committee amendment that would have been there has been absorbed into his, but at any rate, if his amendment is adopted, his amendment has been adopted, that now is the bill. Is that correct?
It's part of the bill. It's not the whole bill.
What is left after his is adopted?
I have to get my glasses on. Okay, so section 1 to 9 and 30 repeals section 66739 and harmonizes 9 other sections within the motor fuels tax statutes to reflect this outright repeal. The statute currently requires separation of motor fuel tax auditing and collection from other parts of the department. Motor fuel staff are funded through a cash fund as opposed to the general fund. Repealing this statute would allow auditors and collections personnel to work on more than one tax program and creates efficiencies within the department. Section 10. Current law requires county boards to publish a list of delinquent taxpayers and forward the list to the property tax administrator.
Excuse me, you answered the question. His amendment, if you don't mind, so that you don't have to say more than is necessary, his amendment struck the committee amendment.
I'm sorry.
Right, and the committee amendment did not replace the whole bill. It just struck certain specific sections from the bill.
2 parts.
Okay, whichever. But much of the original bill would still be, much of the green copy still would be before us.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what I needed to ask. Thank you. Senator Erdman, I'd like to ask you a question if you would yield.
Senator Erdman, yield, please.
Yes, I would.
Senator Erdman, in your amendment on page 11 is a definition of destroyed real property. I will let you be sure that I am talking about your amendment before I proceed.
Okay.
Is that starting in line 28 on page 11?
Correct.
Part of your, okay. Destroyed is not defined.
That's correct.
People have discussed what might be affected. Destroyed, in my mind, and these might just be synonym, it'd be obliterated, completely gone. It doesn't mean a house where all the windows are gone, the floor is gone, but the foundation remains. That house has not been destroyed. Maybe it's uninhabitable, but destruction would be total in my mind. And I'm not asking you to remedy that, but I wanted to be sure that this definition is the only definition of real property, destroyed property. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. If those of us, Mr. President and members, could have questions about what this means, then the term is vague. If it means totally obliterated, which is what destroyed in its ordinary sense would mean, mold doesn't mean anything. If it's been rendered uninhabitable and it must be burned down or torn down, that doesn't fit the definition. The only word in here that relates to it is fire. It doesn't say flood. It doesn't say hurricane. It doesn't say tornado. It says natural disaster. I'm going to turn on my light because I have some genuine questions about this, but I'm not going to try to remedy them. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Chambers. You may continue, Senator Chambers.
I'd like to ask Senator Erdman a question or two, and this is for the record.
Senator Bengio, please.
Senator Erdman, what does the term natural disaster mean?
Well, for the sake of a definition that you may not agree with, is an act of God.
Well, sending you to hell is an act of God, so if you go to hell, then that's a natural disaster?
If you go to hell, is that a natural disaster? Is that your question?
It'd be a personal disaster, of course.
It is a personal disaster.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a national disaster.
But what I would like to know, saying act of God is still an undefined term. So what are those activities, actions, or whatever that would qualify under the term natural disaster?
I think that definition would be it'd be a great expanse to explain all those, and I think that it would be an opportunity that we would have to take a significant amount of time to define all of those things. I don't know that we can describe everything in a bill what a natural disaster is, but those things beyond your control.
I'm not asking you to define them. I'm asking you to list some of them so that I know what is being talked about.
A flood, a tornado, hailstorm, a windstorm, hurricane.
But a hailstorm would not fit under this bill because it wouldn't totally destroy the house. But I understand what I'm asking for, and you're giving that.
Right.
Thank you. Members of the legislature, I know what people generally mean. We can say people generally would understand, but you're now talking about tax law. You're talking about forgiveness as far as paying taxes, and it wouldn't be, to me, unreasonable to specify the kinds of what you all call natural disasters that would occur in Nebraska. Extensive hail damage would be a natural disaster, perhaps, but it wouldn't qualify under this bill. If a flood came and washed away 2/3 of the house, that house has not been destroyed. If a fire burns the top 2 floors of a 3-story house, that house hasn't been destroyed. It has been damaged severely, but there is something that remains. When something is destroyed, it's gone. I'm not going to offer to improve this bill. I think there are other more serious constitutional matters connected with it. But those are things that I have to do some more study on. And since what I say is so little regarded, if it's like I think it is, I may just keep it to myself, then mention if I'm correct and doomsday comes, that's when I would say it didn't have to end this way. But there is such a bad relationship between me and the rest of you all that I don't feel a responsibility to save you from yourselves. And if a piece of legislation is not in accord with the Constitution, all I will have done is to save the public from bad legislation. You all are the geniuses. You all know everything.
1 minute.
Talk to each other and satisfy yourselves that this language is tight enough. Now, if a word is understood in its ordinary meaning, destroyed is not the same as uninhabitable. But a good lawyer would argue that for the purpose of a house, there is no house. That wouldn't do. Destroyed means destroyed. And if while you're looking at the legislation, you're dealing with it, you've had questions raised by others than myself, but you choose not to do anything about it, then whatever the consequences of that will be are the consequences that will be borne. I'm not going to try to stop this bill today. I wanted a record vote to show that I did not vote to adopt the amendment. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks,
President.
Senator Chambers. Senator Mosier. Senator Mosier, you recognize.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. President. I was just checking with Senator Erdman to see if he might respond to a question.
Senator Erdman, yield, please.
Certainly would.
Good morning. Aren't we just talking about a fraction of a year here? Once the next tax year rolls around, the property's revalued on January 1st or 15th, whatever that date is, correct?
That's correct. January 1st at 12:01 a.m., whatever's on the property, that's be the assessed value for the following year.
So the property's not going to go to zero and stay there. We're just talking about that fraction of a year.
The property will never go to zero, Senator, because there'll be value there on the lot or whatever is there, but the value will never go to zero, and it'll be the value on January 1st. In this example, they would start on January 1st, 2020.
Okay. On the question of destroyed, might a reasonable amendment be to, if the value of a property changes by 50% or 75% or something on that order from a natural disaster, that the people could apply for relief with their property tax? Might that be a way of looking at it?
That very well could be. One of the issues that we have with the bill, one of the conceptions is that you make an application with the county assessor, and then it'll be up to the Board of Equalization to approve or disapprove of that designation. And then if you're not, if the decision's not acceptable to you, you can appeal that to Turk. So
Okay.
have an opportunity for appeal process.
Great. Thank you very much, Senator. Thank you. And just one comment about who we listen to in the legislature. I think we all listen to everybody. I don't grossly discount anything anybody says. There are a lot of good minds in this legislature, all the way from the most experienced all the way down to those of us who've only been here 2 months. And every once in a while, a fool has a good idea, and every once in a while, the smartest people in the room has a good idea. So hopefully we'll move forward and vote for the things that in our heart we feel are right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Senator Mosier. Senator Chambers, you recognize your third opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to continue to be that itch you cannot scratch. I appreciate Senator Moser's efforts to pour oil on troubled waters, which he has attempted several times this session to do, and I respect him for that, and that's not said sarcastically. I've been one who said that people ought to participate in the debate because everybody brings something, and it can be added to what we're trying to get done. But when you start talking about a moving target, a sliding scale, something when we're talking about taxation, which is left to the discretion of somebody who's using a pencil and a piece of paper and has a certain individual in front of him or her and can be affected by those kind of considerations, then you introduce arbitrariness into your taxing system. You're putting it in the statute. Either destroyed means destroyed or it does not. If it does not mean destroyed, then you're going to have to work with something like Senator Moser might have suggested, where an individual, one individual, makes calculations to determine what percentage or what percent of value remains, I guess for taxing purposes, or for purposes of that structure, or for what? Of what? A court is not going to say, well, I know that people in the legislature are not all experts. They're not consultants. They're certainly not appraisers. So we'll take into consideration their lack of knowledge and supply meaning to a word that they did not supply and rewrite the statute. That's not going to happen. If it's challenged, it'll simply be struck down. You mean destroyed or you don't. Destroyed means something to me, but obviously there are senators who have wonderings about whether certain conditions of property would fit under the rubric destroyed property. But that's for you all to work out. It's your bill. You've decided you want to do some good. Now, if you're trying to do good to those who need food, I would spare no effort. I'd be willing to take whatever time is necessary to help us reach that goal in a way that's constitutional and can withstand a challenge in court. If we were trying to guarantee a decent minimum wage to tip workers, I would work assiduously to make sure we do that in a way that could withstand a legal challenge. If we were going to protect all people, we shouldn't even have to carve out what are called protected classes. Classes means you separated and set aside different human beings because they're not all the same, they're not on the same footing, so there are these classes. And a class will come into existence based on whether or not a majority of the senators agree that that particular group of people will qualify as a protected class. Why can't every human being be protected under the Constitution? Why cannot every human being have a right to work without facing discrimination? Why cannot every human being who is hungry have access to food? That's why I get upset with you all.
1 minute.
And it's why I'm not going to try to bail you out on some of this legislation that you bring like this. And you might ask me, if you're trying to help everybody, then what about now? I'd say this bill does not include everybody. The everybody that I'm talking about includes the ones that you all care not one whit about. I wanted some things on the record, so if my inquiry further into this, not on the floor, is correct, then I will know something, and I will give you all hints, but I won't give you the answer. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Mr. Chambers. Senator Linehan, you're recognized to close on the Revenue Committee amendment. Senator Linehan, waive closing. Question before the body is the adoption of AM 423, the Revenue Committee amendment to LB 512. Those in favor of the Revenue Committee amendment, vote aye. Those opposed, vote nay. Record vote has been requested. Have you all voted to care to? Record, please.
Voting aye, Senators Albright, Arch, Blood, Bostelman, Brandt, Breesy, Kavanaugh, Clements, Crawford, DeBoer, Dorn, Erdman, Friesen, Geist, Groney, Halloran, Hanson, Hilgers, Hickelman, Howard, Hughes, Hunt, Coulterman, LaGrone, Lathrop, Linehan, Lowe, McAllister, McDonald, Moorfeld, Moser, Merman, Pansing, Brooks, Quick, Shear, Slama, Stinner, Walls, Wayne, and Williams. 41 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on adoption of committee amendments.
Revenue Committee amendments adopted. Is there any further discussion on LB 512 as amended? Senator Linehan, you're recognized to close on the advance of the bill.
I just want to thank everybody for this morning's debate, including Senator Chambers. And again, Senator Erdman, the committee will all work between now and select to address the concerns that were brought to our attention this morning. So with that, thank you very much, and I appreciate your green vote on LB 512. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Members, you heard the debate on LB 512. The question for the body is the advance of the bill. T in our initial. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Record vote has been requested. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
Voting aye. Senators Albright, Arch, Blood, Bostelman, Brandt, Brewer, Kavanaugh, Clements, Crawford, DeBoer, Erdman, Friesen, Geist, Gregor, Groney, Holleran, Hanson, Hilders, Hickelman, Howard, Hughes, Coulterman, LaGrone, Lathrop, Linehan, Lowe, McAllister, McDonald, Moorfeld, Moser, Merman, Pansy, Brooks, Quick, Shear, Slamis, Stinner, Vargas, Walls, Wayne, and Williams. Senator Dorn voting yes. 42 ayes, no nays, Mr. President, on the advancement of LB 512.
LB 512 advances.
Yeah.
Items to the record, please.
Yes, Mr. President, thank you. Enrollment and Review reports the following bills to select files, some having E&R amendments: 556, 556A, 570, 570A, 445, 222, and 180. Mr. President, the Government Committee will have a meeting, an executive session this morning at 11 o'clock underneath the south balcony. That's the Government Committee. And I have an amendment to be printed from Senator Howard, LB 57A. That's all that I have, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Proceeding on the agenda, General File 2019 Committee Priority Bill, LB 334. Mr. Clerk.
LB 334 is a bill by Senator Stinner relating to economic development. It changes and eliminates provisionally the rules and regulations of the Department of Economic Development, stops granting tax credit under the Angel Investment Tax Credit Act. It eliminates the termination date. It states appropriation intent language, requires evaluation of programs, and provides the duties for the Appropriations Committee. The bill was introduced on January 16, referred to the Appropriations Committee for public hearing, advanced to general file. I have committee amendments as well as amendments to those committee amendments, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Senator Stinner, you recognized to open on LB 334.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the legislature. LB 334 would provide intent language to increase the appropriations to the Department of Economic Development for the Business Innovation Act by $4 million through cost savings from the elimination of the Angel Investment Tax Credit. Regulations under DED for the purpose of planning and development regions would also be made permissive. This legislation is an important piece of what has become an incredibly successful number of programs under the Business Innovation Act, which is essential to Nebraska's economic growth. Since 2011, there have been 81 R&D projects, 208 prototype projects, 95 small business innovation research and small business technical transfers, and 52 seed investments and various other grants, investments, and microloans dispensed. Under the Act, there are 5 programs. There is the Nebraska Seed Investment Program, the Nebraska Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Tech Transfer, or SBIR, STTR grant program, the Nebraska Innovation Fund Prototype Grant Program, the Nebraska Academic Research and Development Grant, and the Micro Enterprise Loan and Technical Assistance Program. Next, I'd like to give you a brief breakdown of how each of these programs work and some of the successes that we've seen so far. First is the Seed Investment Program. It provides up to $500,000 of financial assistance for the commercialization of product, process, or service to high-growth, early-stage companies with potential to raise private capital. The state has awarded $13 million to 52 projects and leveraged over $88 million in matching funds. After this initial investment, these same companies have gone to raise a combined total of $133 million of capital. Second is the SBIR STTR grant program, which is a matching grant that provides financial assistance to Nebraska businesses that have received a federal SBIR or STRR grant. The state has awarded $4 million to 95 projects and have leveraged up to $16 million in federal funds. The third is the Innovation Fund Prototype Grant Program, which is a matching grant that provides financial assistance for product development to businesses operating in Nebraska. The state has awarded $10 million to 208 projects and will leverage nearly $9 million. Fourth is the Academic Research and Development Grant Program, which is matched competitive grant for research and development activities done in conjunction with a Nebraska college or university. The state has awarded $10 million in 81 projects and have leveraged over $8 million. And lastly, the Micro Enterprise Loan Fund, which has provided loans up to $100,000 to provide for grants for micro loan delivery and technical assistance. The state has dispersed over $12 million in microloans and assistance. I would just like to reiterate how essential it is that we as legislators invest in Nebraska's continuing economic growth. In order to do so, we need to address the lack of capital to help high-growth businesses, especially technically related businesses, get started in Nebraska. These early-stage businesses are not bankable and lack accessible capital in Nebraska's entrepreneurial ecosystem without a continued commitment from these investments by the state. With your consent, Mr. President, I would request that we move on to the committee amendment AM 801.
Please proceed, Senator.
AM 801 was brought to the committee to address a number of adjustments needed in the bill. It would strike the original language and add a number of modifications. The first I'd like to address is an offset of $100,000 to balance the fiscal note to zero. As you will see in the fiscal note, the Department of Revenue reported a fiscal impact of $101,831 for reprogramming costs to be paid to the Office of the Chief Information Officer to carry out the provisions of this bill. The second modification would be to adopt similar language to Senator Erdman's AM 742 with a slight revision. In sum, the language would require DED to put out a bid on the evaluation and assessment component in Section 8, Subsection 2 of the bill without requiring requests for proposal, which can be lengthy and a costly process. And finally, AM 801 would remove the angel investment tax credit from the list of performance audits required under the state statute 50-1209. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, I now have a series of amendments to the committee amendments. The first is by Senator Erdman, AM 742.
Senator Erdman, you're recognized to open on AM 742.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor, and good morning again. As you heard in Senator Stinner's opening, that I had dropped this amendment because I wanted to give an opportunity for other nonprofits, other organizations who may be able to do this analytical work for us. And when you do not have a bid process, sometimes you don't get the best deal. So when I presented my amendment to the committee agreed that we could do that. And I do not understand, and maybe I never will, on how it could cost $20,000 to do an RFP. But that was the information that came back. If we did an RFP, it would cost $20,000. I'm not sure what that means, and maybe somebody could help me with that. So I appreciate the committee amending what I was trying to do into the bill, and therefore I want to withdraw AM 742. Thank you.
AM 742 is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, the next amendment to the committee amendment, Senator Clements, AM 1185.
Senator Clements, recognized to open on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Senator Stinner for adding this amendment to the Appropriations Committee Priority Bill, LB 334. AM 1185 adds my LB 452 into LB 334 by amending the committee amendment AM 801. AM 1185 amends Section 13901 to change the boundaries of two Nebraska planning and development regions, moving Cass County from Region 6, Southeast Nebraska Development District, to Region 8, Metropolitan Area Planning Agency. The map handout shows the district boundaries and how Cass County would move north with Washington, Douglas, and Sarpy. This will allow Cass County to more effectively take advantage of the current planning and development connections that already exist with the Sarpy County metro area. Cass County commissioners and city officials ask for this change. They want to be more involved in the development coming toward them from the Omaha metro area. The Metro Area Planning Agency, MAPA, directors support this change. LB 452 advanced from the Government, Military, and Veterans Affairs Committee with an 8-0 vote. There was no testimony in opposition. AM 1185 includes a provision requested by the Nebraska Regional Officials Council. It creates a one-year moratorium on future development boundary changes while they develop a process for future changes, but still allowing Cass County to move to Region 8 now. AM 801 to LB 334 opened up 13-907, which allows the promulgation of economic development rules and regulations by the Department of Economic Development, which fits with the subject of my AM 1185. Thank you for your consideration of AM 1185 and encourage your green vote to adopt it to LB 334. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Clements. Debate is now open on LB 334, committee amendment, and Senator Clements' amendment to the committee amendment. Senator Coltman. Is Senator Coltman on the floor? I do not see him. Is there any member wishing to speak on the bill of the committee amendment or Senator Clements' amendment? Senator Clements, you're recognized to close on AM 1185. He waives closed. The question for the body is the adoption of the amendment. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted care to? Record, please.
39 ayes, no nays on the adoption of the amendment to the committee amendments.
AM 1185 is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Senator Linehan would move to amend with AM 1220.
Senator Linehan, you're recognized to open on AM 1220.
Thank you, Mr. President, colleagues. First, I want to thank Senator Stinner and the Appropriations Committee for the work on this bill. Obviously, they've done a good job. What I'm trying to do here, what I would like to do, I think we're in a situation where our funding, we're not going to know until we're close to the end of where we are on money. So I am introducing AM 1220 to LB 334 to redirect the $4 million in savings from ending the angel investment credit. First, I would like to say that I understand why the Appropriations Committee wants to direct this money to the Business Innovation Act. It's a very good program. The report done by the University of Nebraska shows that this program has positive impact on the state. Businesses using this program have contributed to our economy by creating new jobs and making new investments. I applaud the work done by the Department of Economic Development to make this a successful program. However, I think the recent flooding and other natural disasters in our state require us to direct some additional money towards the relief efforts across the state. That is why I brought this amendment, to redirect the $4 million in savings to the governor's emergency cash fund, which I think we all know the governor has been using to help mitigate the disaster that we have experienced this spring. The fund is used to pay eligible costs related to the state emergency disaster declarations and is administered by the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency. I believe the money we are saving by terminating the angel investment tax credit should go to the governor's emergency fund at this point. As I said in the beginning, I think the Business Innovation Act is a very good program. The program is currently receiving $6 million in funding, and I hope that we can find some additional funding for it in the future. I would ask for your green vote on AM 1220 to LB 334. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Before proceeding, Senator Clements announced some guests visiting today. We have with us 12 fourth graders from St. John the Baptist Catholic School in Plattsmouth, Nebraska. With those fourth graders up in the north balcony, please rise so we can welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. And Senator Moorfeld has 12 fourth graders from St. Patrick's Catholic School in Lincoln, Nebraska. With the St. Patrick's fourth graders, please rise up in the north balconies. We welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. Thank you for visiting the legislature. Debate is now open. Senator Coltman.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I apologize for a few minutes ago, but I was getting some copies printed, and I thought I'd punched out of the queue. So anyway, I can still talk about what I was going to talk about. I rise in opposition to AM 1220 and rise in support of LB 334 and AM 801. I understand what Senator Linehan is trying to do with her amendment, but I think that we need to allow the committees that are working on the bills that they're working on and to understand the budgeting process to do their work. I know it's hard to talk about giving flood relief to people. I'm not talking about doing that. I've not heard anything that says that we're not making our budget and we're not taking care of the people that are out there. I think we need to let the Appropriations Committee work their magic, and because they're the ones that deal with how the money's appropriated. More importantly, though, I received several emails from an individual by the name of Michael Dixon. He's a doctor. He spent 15 years at the University of Nebraska helping identify, protect, and commercialize new discoveries and innovations created at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and the University of Nebraska at Omaha. He served on the board of directors of Invest Nebraska from 2008 to 2016, and he led the board as chair in 2015 and 16. And he continues to support the Invest Nebraska as an emeritus director. In the past 5 years, they've had more than 400 new inventions created at UNMC. And these inventions and ideas have generated 80 new partnerships ranging from new drugs to diagnostic medical devices. Currently, the majority of the new discoveries are developed by companies outside of Nebraska. But the intent of LB 334 was to further support and develop the Business Innovation Act, and it will allow more university innovations to be developed along with other businesses throughout the state, create more high-wage job opportunities for our residents. So his recommendation is that we continue to work this plan and strengthen the Innovation Act. I support Senator Stinner and the work of the Appropriations Committee. I think we need to allow the committees to do their work. Again, I'm not against flood relief, but I think that the Appropriations Committee has that well in hand, and would ask you to support LB 334 and AM 801 and vote against AM 1220, even though it's meant well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Coltman. Senator Stinner.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, I want to apologize to Senator Linehan. We've had a couple of conversations about this. I know there was one conversation about including the $4 million in her package for property tax relief. I'm going to chalk it up to my bad hearing on the, and when you get older, you do have bad hearing, so get ready, young kids.
So I did not hear it, so this caught me a little bit flat-footed today. But that all said, what the proposal is, sure, we want to direct it into the emergency fund. What you're doing is taking it out of the angel tax credit and repurposing it to general funds. General funds, that's all part of the emergency fund that the governor has. We're assessing that emergency fund as we speak. Right now, we try to keep $5 million in the emergency fund at all times. That's kind of the watermark or the amount that we use. Right now, it's down to $400,000. We will probably put a $5 million and $5 million allocation to keep the governor's fund in the next budget to the level of $5 million. Plus, there apparently is another 12.5% of what we have to contribute from the state side, or $3.5 million that we will probably include in our budget proposal. This all has to be discussed. There's numbers that are still coming in. The question today is, do we put $4 million and repurpose it into the Business Innovation Act, or do you want to put it in the general fund? That's the question. And all I want to do is bring up the Business Innovation Act was really a function in 2010, the Department of Economic Development and the Nebraska Department of Labor contracted with the Battelle Partnership to undertake what was to become known as the Battelle Study. It was introduced by Galen Hadley in 2011. The main purpose of the bill was to address the lack of capital to help high-growth businesses, especially technology-related business, get started in Nebraska. And if you understand the anatomy of a business, many times you have to go, there's different phases. The discovery phase is the one that says, hey, here's an idea. We need to put an application together. We need to put a business plan. Then you've got a proof of concept time and product design and then product development. That covers that span. And of course, when you go into mass manufacturing, then banks and other lenders will get involved along with venture capital. So that's kind of the anatomy of this thing. Interestingly, at the time they passed it, it passed 100%. It was a unanimous vote. Everybody thought that this was a good idea. Now, $7 million was allocated to the fund, of which we cut 10% off the last time in order to make our budget work. So we're at $6.3 million. They're oversubscribed by at least $4 million that we're trying to put into this fund. We're trying to restore it. But interestingly, in 2011, we were 51st, last in the country in this type of capital. I call it venture capital, maybe even startup capital as a state. Because of this fund, we actually have varied. We went to 45th, to 42nd, to 34th. We're 31st in the country. So it has moved the dials. It has presented us to the nation as a place where you can come, start a business, and have availability of programs in which to build that small startup business. The research and development side, again, with the universities and the state colleges, are an important piece of taking ideas, taking research, and moving those along so that at some point in time, it too becomes a business and a marketable product. So, for my mind, the $4 million is best purposed into the Business Innovation Act. I appreciate the fact that everybody's concerned about balancing the budget and the floods and the rest of that stuff, but to repurpose it outside the Business Innovation Act, I think, is ill-advised at this point.
Thanks, Senator. Senator Ben Hansen.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do stand in support of Senator Linehan's AM 1220. I think right now, in this current atmosphere and with the flooding, I personally would like to see the $4 million we're going to be getting from the removal of the Angel Investment Act used for property tax credit relief. But I understand with the climate of the state right now and where we're at with all the destruction, I think reinvesting it into the governor's emergency fund would be appropriate. I just had one question for Senator Linehan, if she'd yield to a question, please.
Senator Linehan, would you yield, please?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I noticed in your amendment it says that we would reinvest this $4 million into the governor's emergency fund fiscal year 2021 and every year thereafter.
That should be fixed. I mean, we'll do a fix. What I'm trying to do here is we're going to have X number of dollars to spend on the floor, and that's spending for property tax relief and all the other things that we want to do this year. And I don't agree with the idea that we take one program outside of the whole conversation of what we're spending, our budget conversation, and beef it up by $4 million when we've got a lot of other things that we need to pay for. So again, I agree this program is a good program. I don't want to hurt this program. Senator Stinner's made that clear, but this is $4 million that we're not using the way it used to be used, and I think it should be part of the bigger conversation. And the emergency fund, we know we've got to fill that back up, so I thought that was a good place to park the money.
Thank you. And I do agree. And I agree with also Senator Stinner's comments about the business climate in the state of Nebraska, how well I think we've done over the years. I believe we got the Governor's Cup for Economic Development again this year. So it seems like we're on the right track. And so when we're talking about dire straits and where we want to spend our money, we got $4 million sitting out there. I personally would like to see it for property tax relief. But I think also using it because of the flooding, because of what's going on with other people's homes, I think using it for the Governor's Emergency Fund with roads, I think is much more appropriate this year, and then being reevaluated again for next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Hansen. Senator Williams.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. First of all, Senator Stinner has done an excellent job talking about the Business Innovation Act and the successes of that, and many of us have seen that happen. I've had the opportunity to be involved with Innovation Campus. We see it there on a daily basis. The 40 partners that we have out there, many of them are there with the new incentives, the startup, the technology, because of the Business Innovation Act. For those that want property tax relief, the quickest property tax relief we can have in this state is continuing to find ways to grow our state. You've heard me say that every time I stand on the mic and talk about economic development. That's what additional reinvestment in the Business Innovation Act leads to, is continuing to grow our state further. But I would like to talk briefly about process, because I believe the process that we follow in here is of extreme importance. LB 334 was referenced to the Appropriations Committee. The Appropriations Committee held a hearing on this. The hearing was on the bill. The bill was about redirecting the Angel Tax Credit, $4 million, to the Business Innovation Act. There was no opposition testimony in the hearing to taking those funds, closing the Angel investment, and allocating those $4 million to the Business Innovation Act. The committee then, on a 9-0 vote, voted that out of committee for this body to consider. And now we have an amendment to a committee priority bill to completely change the allocation of those dollars. That wasn't considered by the Appropriations Committee. There was not testimony at the Appropriations Committee concerning that particular issue. Now, does it mean we can't take it up? No, it doesn't mean we can't take it up. But it does cloud that issue. Certainly it clouds it for me, especially when, now Senator Linehan just talked about this, but under the amendment, it allocates that $4 million each year into the future, into a fund that sometimes we use, and we're going to use it this year, and some years we don't use that fund because we're fortunate enough not to have those kind of circumstances happen. The Appropriations Committee, the budgeting process, has been able to handle the Governor's Emergency Fund cash fund dollars in a prudent manner for years. And I trust the process for them to be able to continue doing that this year, next year, and into the future. Therefore, I think it is the best situation to follow the process that was established, follow the committee's amendment and the underlying bill, and vote red on Senator Linehan's AM 1220. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Williams. Senator Linehan. You're next in the queue, Senator Linehan.
Thank you very much. Again, on the process of this, if we want to go there, it's a tax credit that one could argue should have came to the Revenue Committee. It went instead to appropriators. At the time when this was happening early in the session, I did not catch that there should have been at least a discussion in executive where this bill should be referenced. If I recall, I was fighting over keeping another bill from being referenced to, I think, Senator Hughes's committee. So maybe in that, I missed early on, and that's on me, that I didn't see this early on. But I think there's a danger when we take any money, whether it's this $4 million or $10 million for something else, when we're in a situation when we don't know what our funding is going to be. We don't know if we're going to have, we don't even know if we're going to have any money to spend on the floor. We hope we do. The governor's budget had some money. I think the appropriators are going to try and have some money to spend on the floor. But since we don't have any idea whether we're going to have any extra money, it seems odd to me that we would take this $4 million that we could save, since the decision was made to kill the Angel Tax Credit program, that we wouldn't save it until we're looking at the whole big picture of what we're trying to do this year, including property tax relief and any other kind of tax relief that we're looking at this year. So that's my concern, is somehow this $4 million gets slid over without being part of the bigger process we're all going to be involved in before we get out of here in June. So I would ask you to support AM 1220. I've talked to Senator Skinner. The amendment should be adjusted so the money can go back to the general fund after, I'll negotiate with Senator Skinner if he wants it 1 year or 2 years. That is his, he does know the money, so I agree that it shouldn't be forever and ever, because hopefully, at least we hope, we don't have a disaster every year. So, but right now, we all know, we have no option but to put the governor's emergency fund back at $5 million. We all know that. And right now, there's $4 million that we can use to help close that hole. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Linehan. Senator Albright.
Thank you, President Foley. I just have a few questions for Senator Skinner, if I can.
Senator Skinner, yield, please.
Yes.
I appreciate you looking into 334, because I know the interim study that we had, we were looking to look at a lot of the different acts that are out there that are going to be sunsetting, and the Angel was a part of one that we talked about. What is the current funding in the Angel account at this time?
It was capped at $4 million.
It was capped, so every year we would put the $4 million in. Is that all that's in there right now?
Yes, and it's always been oversubscribed the first day.
Okay, so you're going to add another $4 million to it, so they'd have $8 million in there for this year, next year?
No. The Angel tax credit will be gone. Excuse me. $4 million is what we've allocated every year for the Angel investment tax credit. So that $4 million is gone. The Angel tax credit is gone. Those dollars are in this bill would repurpose that $4 million to the Business Innovation Act. Given the Innovation Act right now is 6.3, we give them another $4 million, would take them to 10.3 that they could use for the 5 different.
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask. So the Business Innovation Act has been around for how long?
It was passed in 2011.
2011. So if they currently have a 6.3 in there, and we're going to bring it up to 10.3, I would like to see, if we're going to be having a choice of where this money is going to be drawn from. At this point, real quick, where's the general fund today? Are we in a negative or positive?
Where are the total general funds? We're in the process of trying to figure out that, but we are short right now, period.
Is 25 million or 20, I mean, do you know how much approximately?
After we were given the news on forecasting board, I'll just take you from the preliminary budget that did balance. We lost about $40 million of appropriations for this biennium. So we start with $40 million down from there. And all of the money that normally would have gone in, 70 million into the rainy day fund, is gone. So if we're going to have a discussion, we're going to need to have a discussion about rainy day fund along with what this body believes is important.
And again, I appreciate all the answers. It helps me to try to make a decision for myself on AM 1220, because not only do we not have that rainy day set up, but with this disaster that we just had, and we're not out of the flooding season just yet. So, you know, knowing that the Business Innovation Act currently does have 6.3 million, we're going to add another 4 to it. That I feel like that would be easier to swallow to move that than to, and it's for 1 year, right? It's not actually going to be every year. So if this is an area that is obvious to most on the floor that maybe this is the way we need to go to protect our the governor's fund as well, I would rise to support AM 1220. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Albright. Senator Arch.
Thank you. And I just have a couple of questions for Senator Stinner, if he would yield.
Senator Stinner, would you yield, please?
Yes.
Thank you. You and I have had conversations about this bill, and you know how strong I support economic development, and Business Innovation Act has been one of those things where you can demonstrate the results, and it's all been very good. As I have been reading the papers and seeing the estimates of the damage, you referenced a number of $3.5 million for emergency. I can't recall the exact words you used, but when I see the $100 million that has shown up as a very gross, high-level estimate of the damage, and you mentioned the 12.5%, so the state has 12.5% responsibility, counties 12.5%, federal 75%, as I understand the formula. So the 12.5%, could you help me, I guess, understand as you look to the future how those funds will come out of our budget as it relates to this particular disaster? If you understand my question.
Right now, the number that we have been given in appropriations is there is about a $12.5 million number that is individual losses that we would have to cover. Actually, it's 75-25. 12.5% would go to local, 12.5% would be the state's obligation. So with that estimate, we feel that there needs to be $3.5 million over and above the $5 million to replenish. So now we're going to look at $8.5 million plus another $5 million just in case, because this will run out over a period of about 3 years. So and actually we haven't come down with an exact number. The committee hasn't voted on it, but I've talked enough with the folks involved that I think that's a prudent number.
So your estimate then is $8.5 million then so it was 3.5 above the 5, so an $8.5 million total then for the state's obligation, estimate, of course, for this particular disaster.
It will be a total that we're going to allocate impact on our biennium budget of $13.5 million right now.
13.5. Okay. Okay, so, and then as we relate to this, I mean, obviously you have a much better handle on the total numbers and how it all plays out. And I guess at this point you're saying that the $4 million we're discussing now is not necessary for that replenishment.
It would be nice to have about $40 or $50 million to tell you the truth, but that is not going to happen. I mean, this is policy, okay? Do you want the $4 million in economic development, or do you want the $4 million in general funds, of which appropriations will say X amount will go to, and I just gave you the emergency fund numbers.
Yeah.
and we've got other requests. We've got, we still haven't solved our prison problem, our overcrowding problem, Medicaid expansion, all the rest of that stuff that comes in. So
Sure.
it is challenging and it's complicated.
Yeah, well, I appreciate your work on that and your knowledge of that, so thank you. Thank you for the answers.
Thank you, Senators Arch and Stinner. Senator Stinner, you're next in the queue. Senator Stinner? Senator Stinner, you're next in the speaking queue. You're next in queue.
Oh, I saw that. Well, one of the things I want to make abundantly clear is we're going to take care of the flood victims and make sure that we appropriate enough dollars as we see it during the budget time. I can assure you appropriations is highly involved in that process right now. Still very fluid, very moving targets. I get that. We're trying to build in buffers and we're trying to take care of things. So whether we want to repurpose this $4 million out of economic development and put it in there, that's your decision as you vote for this thing. My preference would be to stay with a program that builds jobs, that builds industry, that provides capital for startups. That's my opinion. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. Senator Slama.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today in support of AM 1220, and I'll be brief with my comments. The hearing for LB 334 was held on Wednesday, March 13th. This was before we had the costliest and most widespread disaster in our state's history. Right now, we're at an unprecedented time in our state where we need to juggle property tax relief and rebuilding after the devastation we've seen across broad swaths of the state. So yes, there's been lots of references to processes and building jobs in Nebraska, but we also have $4 million sitting here that could be used to help rebuild the state. And I'm going to vote in favor of rebuilding the state and giving that $4 million to the people who desperately need it. I rise in support again for AM 1220, AM 801, and LB 334, and appreciate Senator Linehan's efforts in bringing this amendment so that we can get direct aid now to these flood victims. With that, I yield the rest of my time to Senator Erdman, if he'll take it.
Thank you, Senator Slama. Senator Erdman, 3 minutes 40.
Thank you very much, Senator Slama. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. So this morning, just a moment ago, I heard Senator Stinner talk about the federal, state, and county or local match. And I was wondering if Senator Stinner would yield to a question.
Senator Stinner, would you yield, please?
Yes, I will.
Senator Stinner, in your comments, you said it would be 75-25 match. Have you information to validify the fact that we have been notified that we're going to get a 75-25 match?
I do not have information that we've been officially notified. I think we're doing projections because we're in a budget period and we've got to project out what needs are.
Okay. So if we get a 90% match is what we've actually applied for, if we were to change from a 12.5% obligation to 5%, how many dollars is that, do you know?
No, but I'd do a happy dance, I'll tell you that.
Say that again?
I'd do a happy dance.
Okay. But it very well could be, that we get a 90% match. And if we do, that obligation for the state would be less or more than half of what we're asking for. Would that be a fair assumption?
Out of the 3.5 million, it would be reduced considerably, yes.
Yeah. So we just need to keep that in mind, even though we've applied for the 90%, we may not get it, but there's a chance that we might. So depends, I guess, how much disaster aid they give to Puerto Rico to get our funding approved. But things happen different in D.C. than they do here, I would assume. But just wanted to bring it to your attention. We haven't been denied of the 90% yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Erdman and Stinner. Senator Gregor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Hey, I rise in support of AM 1220 for the simple fact of the devastation that has just happened in Nebraska. You know, property tax relief is a priority of ours, and it should be. Economic development is certainly valuable and needs to be continued. However, once again, I believe that our priorities have changed in the last a bit of time here, at least for the short run. And yes, once again, especially in the time of this devastation that we've never have happened in the state of Nebraska. So I hope we can take this all into consideration and vote green on AM 1220 at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Gregor. Senator Crawford.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in opposition to AM 1220 and in support of LB 334. I was chair of the Economic Development Task Force over the past 2 years, and one of our tasks was to look at our different economic development programs and to see what ones appeared to be effective and what we could learn about which ones appeared to contribute to the growth of the state. And the Business Innovation Act was clearly a rock star in those evaluations. I mean, we have clear evaluations that demonstrate how effective it is and what a return on investment we see from the Business Innovation Act, and it stands out as an outstanding economic development program. And so in terms, I hate to see the Angel Investment Act go, but in terms of making sure that we're spending our economic development dollars on things that we have clear evidence that we're getting a strong return on investment on, LB 334 is a great change to make. And I appreciate the fact that we do need more dollars in our Business Innovation Act. Colleagues, we have in terms of the money we spend on economic development, we forego millions of dollars of revenue in terms of our incentives program. Meanwhile, we have some of these small economic development programs that we do cap at small amounts, and and they have often been very effective. And again, the Business Innovation Act is an example of one of the programs that's really had a very strong return on investment. And I appreciate the concern that we need to make sure we're taking care of our needs in our state, our road needs, our community needs. I think that's a very important part of our conversation that we're having over this entire session. And we just had part of that conversation in terms of what to do with assessments with property taxes. And so I appreciate that we're raising that question for this bill as well. However, I do think that it's important that while we make sure we're investing sufficiently to help recover from the flood, that we don't lose sight of our long-term needs in terms of growing the state. And the Business Innovation Act is an important tool that really helps our entrepreneurs. And I think another important benefit of the Business Innovation Act is it really does target those smaller businesses and those entrepreneurs who are getting started. And I've heard many of you in conversations say that was really an important economic development priority for you, is to really focus on investing in those folks who are in Nebraska and wanting to grow something in Nebraska. And the Business Innovation Act is a great tool to do that. And so I think it's very important that we continue to invest in the Business Innovation Act, and I appreciate the opportunity to put more money in that Business Innovation Act because, again, it's one of our really strong economic development programs that has a strong evidence of return on investment. And so being able to put a little bit more money in that, I think, is appropriate for us to do, even in light of the needs we're going to have to address flooding concerns. It's still critical that we continue to invest in economic development, and this is $4 million. I think it's a good investment for $4 million to expand our Business Innovation Act because it is such an effective program and is under-resourced program. And so I think it's an important priority to make sure that we can provide more funds for the Business Innovation Act. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Crawford. Senator Linehan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would be willing, or if we get this passed, I think because we have a great speaker and he's helped us this morning, I changed the amendment, Linehan Amendment 1220, to just have it go for a year, and then we can, and then after that, go to the program that the bill would have it go to now. So I would like to ask Senator Stinner a question, please.
Senator Stinner, will you yield, please?
Yes, I will.
Senator Stinner, would you be agreeable if we change the amendment, or between now and select, we worked on an amendment that puts the money, the $4 million in the emergency fund now, but then going forward brings it back to the Economic Development Fund.
Yes, that's a good compromise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senators. Senator Williams, he weighs the opportunity. Senator Balsaman.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I support Senator Linehan in the sense I was going to bring up the same situation or timeline as what Senator Salama did, because as we looked at this, the hearing was 4 days before the flood and the blizzards. So we had no idea that this need was going to be there. We had no idea where we may need to look at funds and where those funds may go or need to go. So how could we address the areas that Senator Linehan is trying to address now in her amendment before the event actually happened? So back to what Senator Williams was talking about, process, committee priorities, those type of things. I hear what he's saying, I understand it, but I also think we need to take a little pause there and look at timelines. The timeline was, the hearing was prior to, no one had the opportunity or knew that this was going to happen. We were going to have a disaster. So no one came in to testify in that area. So with that, I do support Senator Linehan in her amendment. I think maybe it should be 2 years, but if it's a year, so what the compromise, and I would support that. But that would just give us a little extra time there just to make sure we cover the needs of our counties or individuals that may be out there. Because there is some concern that this could, there's over 2 foot of snow that's being predicted in South Dakota today. That moisture is coming this way at some point in time, in addition to what's already in Montana. So this could be an extended disaster that may occur to us once again. We may see flooding again, and I just want to be sure that we have the opportunity to look at these funding mechanisms and with the glasses on, and that provide funding in the right areas so that our state can recover and individuals can recover in an appropriate time frame. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Balsaman. Senator Groney.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand in support of AM 1220. I like the original one. I'd personally like to see it go in there for this biennium, both years, and then sunset it, and let's the Appropriations Committee or the Revenue Committee decide what to do next biennium. But the point I wanted to make is, folks, property tax relief is economic development, is the best stimulus proven over and over and over again to grow an economy. Tax cuts work. So anytime we can lower the property taxes and across the state of Nebraska, frees up funds that multiplies 5-10 times on Main Street. Government doesn't do that. Anytime we can even cut income taxes, it helps. As far as the Business Innovation Fund, sometimes if everybody's running to get it and there's a lot of applicants, you might got to ask the question, is it happening anyway? Is the business innovation startup companies happening? And this is just gravy? Or is it the other way around? Most of the credits we do, you have a slow start because the economic development people have to go out and sell it to people for seed money. But when it's all gone the first week, you got to ask, is it necessary? We put money into the emergency fund. That's going to go right back out. It's going to multiply itself by matching with federal grants, and that's money that goes into the economy through the construction, the materials that fixes. It's the bright side of a disaster in America with all that money flowing into an economy. We'll get a quicker results with this money into the economy if we put it in the emergency fund than we would through a business incentive. And right now we need a quicker stimulus. So I stand in full support of the original AM 1220. I'll do whatever the compromise is. and AM 801 and LB 334. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Groney. Senator Crawford announces some guests visiting today. We have with us 55 fourth graders from the Birchcrest Elementary School in Bellevue, Nebraska. With the Birchcrest fourth graders up in the north balcony, please rise. I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska Legislature. Senator Crawford, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning again, colleagues. I appreciate the work that Senator Lanahan and the Speaker and Senator Stenner have worked on together to come up with a compromise to address immediate flood needs, but make sure that we're not depleting our resources for economic development going forward. Again, I think the Business Innovation Act is an important tool that we have in our state, and we want to make sure that we're able to provide resources for that tool as effectively as we can. And an opportunity to provide $4 million more per year to that program, I think, is a wise investment of that $4 million. I just wanted to raise on the record one concern I have with AM 801 that I wanted to be on the record and to alert members to, so that we can all be attentive in our oversight role as legislators for these economic development programs. One of the things that Amendment 801 does is it changes language in terms of the regulations that the department puts together. And it changes the shall adopt rules and regs to may adopt rules and regs for some of these economic development programs. Now, in talking to someone on the Appropriations Committee, they thought that many of these rules and regs have already been promulgated. And so they were not as concerned about this language change. However, I think it's very important for us to be very attentive to this change, because basically when the department must have rules and regs, then when they shall have rules and regs, when they must go through the rules and regs process, it means that there's a very public process that determines what the rules of these economic development programs are going to be. So we pass the law that provides the parameters, but the specific devil is in the detail rules about how those work are really often ironed out in the department. And the rules and regs process is a way for the public to see that and to comment when there are changes in those processes. And since these programs are ones that are competitive and people are trying to get those resources, I think it's important that we're as transparent as possible in terms of how those programs are run. And keeping those rules and regs in place is a key part of that. Now, it does say may, so it's still the case that we can have pressure on that department to have those rules and regs, but I am concerned anytime that we change that may to a shall, if it's not the case that we're sure that we have enough details in the statute to make sure that we're being transparent about who gets these resources. And so if there are already rules and regs in place for these programs, one of the implications of changing a shall to a may does mean that the department could choose to have a hearing to eliminate those rules and regs. So I would just want us to be on watch in terms of watching for any changes in those rules and regs that happen on these economic development programs, because again, so often in these programs, the devil is in the details, and how they actually work depends on those more detailed instructions that often happens in the rules and regs. So I will support AM 801, but with that caveat and concern that we're all very attentive and watchful for what happens in terms of the rules and regs tied to these economic development programs, so we can make sure that we keep them transparent to the public in terms of how they work and what the rules and regulations are to receive these to receive the benefits from the economic development programs, and what the rules are in terms of the competition for those resources. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator Crawford. Senator Linehan, you recognize to close on AM 1220.
Thank you, Mr. President. So what I'm going to do here, after talking to the Speaker and Chairman Stenner and listening to debate, I'm going to pull 1220 down, and then between now and select, Senator Stenner and I, he's shaking his head yes, Senator Stenner and I will bring back an amendment that will address, hopefully, concerns on both sides, that uses the money for the emergency, and then in the future it goes back to economic development. Does that Can I ask, would Senator Stinner yield
Senator
for a
Stinner,
question?
yield, please.
Yes.
Does that sound agreeable to you, sir?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll be done. Thank you.
Without objection, AM 1220 is withdrawn. Senator Stinner, you're recognized to close on AM 801. He waives close. Request for the body's adoption of the committee amendment, AM 801. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted here to? Record, please.
40 yeas, no nays on the motion to adopt the committee amendments.
Committee amendments are adopted. Is there any further discussion on the bill? I see none. Senator Stinner, you recognize to close on the advance of the bill. Tina, our initial.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank Chairperson Linehan for working with us on this, on the amendments. This is an important bill, but I can assure everybody in the legislature, top priority is taking care of flood victims. We're definitely not going to short them as it relates to appropriations. So the public needs to know and the legislature needs to know it's top priority. So with that, thank you, and I appreciate your green vote on LB 334.
Thank you, Senator Stinner. The question for the body's advance of LB 3340 in our initial. Those in favor vote aye. Those opposed vote nay. Have you all voted here too? Record, please.
41 nays, no nays on the advancement of the bill.
LB 334 advances. Items to the record, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Appropriations Committee will be having an exec session at noon in room 1003. They will have another exec session this evening. Senator Lindstrom would move to recess the body until 1:30 p.m.
Members, you heard the motion to recess. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. We are in recess till 1:30.